we compare it to a book club.
There's a lot of fun that can be had by discussing that science fiction.
No one could watch through Man from Atlantis.
It's basically just a podcast about bad television that we like to talk about.
There's a lot of analyzing, overanalyzing, and reanalyzing.
It's something of a slice of history.
I find having the conversations with Ben and some of our other guest hosts fascinating.
Fusion Patrol.
That's the name, Fusion Patrol. Be there.
What is Fusion Patrol about?
Fusion Patrol, I would have to say it's akin to a book club, sort of just a discussion about science fiction television. It doesn't have to be current, although we have done current stuff. We were reviewing, or at least talking about Doctor Who during the last season with Matt Smith. But it's basically just a discussion about science fiction television. Mostly old, mostly bad, probably because there's a lot of fun that can be had by discussing bad science fiction. So it's basically just a podcast about bad television that we like to talk about.
What are your earliest or strongest sci-fi memories?
Well, my earliest memory would be Star Trek. It has to be Star Trek. I mean, Star Trek was on every day after school, and I made a point of watching it every day for years on end. Star Trek was, even before school, I could remember it probably from its network run when I was very young. I couldn't remember names, but I mean, I could remember the guy with the pointy ears and the Enterprise more specifically. When we were at school, we used to play Star Trek all the time. You know, Star Trek on the swing, Star Trek on the tunnel tube, Star Trek's on the jungle gym. Anything you could come up with, we could make it into Star Trek. Whether it was a Jeffries tube to a transporter to the bridge set to beaming off the Enterprise by jumping off the swings. I mean, Star Trek. Absolutely Star Trek. My strongest memories, though, probably a little bit older. Obviously, Star Trek is a strong memory and a core piece of my science fiction background. But I particularly loved when I was a kid and on Sunday or sometimes Saturday afternoon, I'd have to go upstairs and watch on the old black and white TV. But you'd get My Partner the Ghost, which is called Randall and Hopkirk Deceased originally, but in the United States it was called My Partner the Ghost. UFO, the Avengers, programs like that, and including things like Lost in Space, but a lot of the British programs that we got at the time. Space 1999 kind of fell in that category, although that was kind of syndicated in an odd way. But that's really where I got my love for British science fiction, and also a little more obscure programs that weren't just mainstream science fiction, like Star Trek.
Well, I would have to say probably Star Trek. I think that's probably going to be the most standard answer for a lot of people, at least my age. I remember watching it as a kid when I was 4 or 5 years old, seeing it on its initial network run on NBC. I really didn't understand it. I remember seeing that there was this really far-out looking spaceship that was like nothing I'd ever seen before in my life. And that was pretty much it. In addition to that, I mean, I would be watching Super Marionation. I was really hip into the Jerry Anderson stuff. I was always watching Supercar, Fireball XL5, Stingray. I grew up with these. I mean, I would call this sci-fi for toddlers almost. I just thought these things were really fantastic. And then later, Thunderbirds, which I think would probably be my favorite, only because I just love the spaceships. But then sci-fi really didn't take... It started to kind of grab hold of me when I was introduced to Japanese science fiction, most notably Godzilla movies. I would watch those with incredible passion. I remember getting the week's TV guide, and I always go right to the Saturday section and look for the independent channels that were in the Bay Area where I used to live. And they would always run science fiction monster movies, and Godzilla was really, really popular at that time. So I'd always look to see what Godzilla movie was on, and I don't think it really mattered. For the most part, if there was a Godzilla movie on, I was going to watch it, and it became almost like some twisted religion for me to see a Godzilla film. I'd always sneak off into my parents' bedroom. They'd be off doing whatever in the living room, running errands, who knows what, and I would go off into their bedroom and turn on the little tiny black and white television, which must have been like 8 inches in diagonally, but I didn't care. I had to watch these Godzilla movies. I thought they were just incredible. And then by the time I started to get into junior high, I found Star Trek again. It really began to take root in syndication. And at this point, I began to better understand it and was rabid. It became like the only thing I would ever watch. I mean, I would even record the episodes on audio tape and play those on my little portable cassette player in my room. Many a weekend, I'd be reading a book, playing, mostly a Star Trek book. Get the Star Trek novelizations, and I'd be playing Star Trek episodic television on my little audio cassette player, kind of a theater of the mind.
Why do you want to talk about old TV shows?
Well, the reason that we've chosen to work with old TV shows is partially nostalgia, and it's partially because of those childhood memories we just discussed, that these things that I grew up on and loved, and in that day and age were only accessible by television when they aired and when you were at the mercy of the broadcaster in your area. Now we live in this great DVD and video on demand age in terms of that, but it also allows us to finally catch up on these shows that we haven't seen since the 1970s. And whereas podcasting, which I think is a fantastic medium, there are programs for every science fiction show that's airing out there. I mean, every episode analyzed and reanalyzed and overanalyzed in every degree and from every aspect every week. And we didn't want to just be another voice in the crowd. We wanted to go in there and analyze and reanalyze and overanalyze programs that aren't being looked at, and perhaps should. Some of them shouldn't. I mean, let's face it. No one could watch through Man from Atlantis, and when you get to the end of it, say, there was a show that was canceled too soon. It's not going to happen. There's a lot of people who'd say they say that, but they haven't watched it recently.
Is there any value to it?
Value? Is entertainment value? I find it entertaining. I find having the conversations with Ben and some of our other guest hosts fascinating. For many years, I would go to various club functions, Doctor Who meetings, Star Trek meetings, and we'd all gather around and we'd watch a new episode of Doctor Who that somebody had just copied for the 12th generation and converted by using a camcorder and bringing it over from the UK. And afterwards, we would sit and discuss the programs, and really those were great times. I mean, there's a lot of analyzing, overanalyzing, and reanalyzing of these programs, but people have a lot of interesting points of view, and they don't necessarily always agree, and we had a lot of fun with it. And Ben and I try to recreate that as much as we can. I think we compare it to a book club, because this is kind of what I see that phenomena being, where people get together and read the same book and then get together and frankly, I think it's there for an afternoon wine tasting, really, but they talk about the book and and get some feedback from each other, and that's what we do. And the only regret that I have with the format of Fusion Patrol is that I don't get enough feedback from the audience. We know they're out there, and presumably some of them find it interesting, or they wouldn't keep downloading and listening to it. But we just don't really have a way to expand that dialogue just yet. But we're working on that, because we really genuinely want to hear different people's different points of views, and but yeah, I think there's some value to it. I mean, it's not going to save the world, and it's certainly not going to line anybody's pockets with gold, least of all not mine. But yeah, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor.
What do you hope people will get from Fusion Patrol?
What do I hope listeners will get? Well, mostly, I hope they're entertained. If they're not entertained, they're not going to come back. And I want them to enjoy what they're hearing. I would like for them to be able to kind of listen to these podcasts and get some enjoyment out of it. And maybe a little bit of education. I mean, I really don't know what our demographic is in terms of age. But I would imagine that most of the people who are listening to the podcast are probably younger than I am, and they probably don't even remember some of the shows that we're talking about. I mean, we've recently been talking about Starlost, Man from Atlantis, UFO, and these are shows which are really not seeing much in the way of syndication today. Not like the science fiction shows that have been on, I'd say, within the last 10 to 20 years. I mean, those are seeing constant playback. Star Trek The Next Generation, Babylon 5, I mean, those shows are getting a lot of play. But the shows that we've been talking about are older. And I would like for people to be able to hear our take on them, because it's not just a representation of what science fiction was at that time, but it's something of a slice of history for people to kind of get a sense of where we were culturally. When you look at, say, for example, UFO, it's clearly a vision of what the future was going to look like based on 1969 when the show was made. So I would kind of hope that when someone listens to our show, that they're not only going to get some kind of enjoyment or education regarding the television shows that we're talking about, but that perhaps they would also get a better understanding of what the history was here when it came to science fiction programming. So I guess that's what I hope that they'll get out of it.
Why is it called Fusion Patrol?
Well, there's a long history to the name Fusion Patrol. This is not the first show that was called Fusion Patrol. We had a show. I had a show. Not just me, but I was showrunner, let's say. And Ben was on it, and also David, who's been on the podcast. And we set out to do a public access television show. Public access at that time was really the only means where people could get their message out on television. And now you can just pop it up on YouTube. But back then there was quite a bit of work to do it, but it was the only avenue, and we thought it was worthwhile. And we started off trying to do a science fiction current affairs news program and showcase the talent of local filmmakers who might not have a chance to do their fan productions. And it kind of evolved into us doing films and skits and spoofs and humorous vignettes. We chose to use Fusion Patrol for the name because it's hard coming up with new names. And also because originally the name was chosen because it makes no sense. It was an homage to Monty Python's Flying Circus, where they had chosen names that made no sense. Owl Stretching Time, Monty Python's Flying Circus. And, Fusion Patrol really makes no sense. I mean, how is Fusion and Patrol in any way a meaningful, but it kind of has a ring to it. And one of the co-creators of Fusion Patrol, Woody Harper, was had a Jeep, and he and I came up with that name, and partially because we thought it would look cool, painted on the side of his Jeep, and for the opening credits, and then bounding over the dunes with like a machine gun on the back, like Rat Patrol, which we never did. But we kept the name. We liked the name, kept it. I still like the name. Woody is unfortunately no longer with us, but he so would have loved podcasting, I think, and it's kind of a bit of a tribute to him as well. But that's the name, Fusion Patrol. Be there. Aloha. Wait, that's Hawaii 5-0. See you next time on Fusion Patrol.